All right, let's just jump right in. We all know that assessment is a huge part of teaching, right? But here's the real question. How do we actually capture the whole complicated journey of a student's learning? How do we do that without just boiling it all down to a single number that, let's be honest, often misses the point entirely? That's the big challenge we're going to tackle today.
The International Baccalaureate itself uses this really powerful phrase, the tyranny of grades. Now, this doesn't mean we're just throwing grades out the window, but it's a really honest way of admitting there's a problem. A single grade can feel so final, so absolute, and it can totally overshadow the actual process of learning. It's a system we use, for sure, but we've got to handle it with a lot of care.
And this is a perfect way to picture the dilemma. Think about a chef for a second. On the left, you've got a simple dish, but it's done perfectly. On the right, a super complex gourmet meal with tons of layers. Both take skill, right? So how on earth could you capture all the knowledge, the technique, the creativity of that chef in a single score out of 7? You just can't. And it's exactly the same for our students.
So if a single grade really isn't the whole story, then what is? Let's strip it all back to basics for a minute and look at the foundation. What actually makes any assessment fair and, well, good?
Okay, so the first big principle, and maybe the most important one, is validity. To put it simply, a valid assessment is an honest one. It has to measure what it says it's going to measure. I mean, you wouldn't test someone's swimming ability by making them run a marathon, would you? So if we say we're assessing writing skills, we should be looking at their writing, at an essay, not just giving them a multiple choice test about grammar rules.
And you see, quality assessment doesn't just happen in a bubble. It's a whole connected system. Think of it like a three-legged stool. You've got the big picture educational objectives, the specific learning outcomes for a unit, and then the assessment design itself. All three of those pillars have to be perfectly aligned. If even one of them is off, the whole thing gets wobbly, and it's just not fair.
And this right here, this brings us to the most important question of all. It's one thing to talk about these awesome principles in theory, but how do we actually bring them to life in a real classroom? A room full of diverse kids, each with their own unique needs and strengths. How do we make it truly accessible for everyone?
Well, the answer is formative assessment. The best way to think about it is as a practical bridge that connects those big, high-level ideas to the day-to-day reality of what's happening in the classroom.
So this is the crucial point. It's a huge shift in mindset. We have to move away from only thinking about assessment of learning, the final exam, the report card, and really start to embrace assessment for learning. This is where assessment stops being a final judgment and starts being an active, ongoing tool that actually guides and shapes the learning while it's still happening.
So what does this actually look like in practice? Well, let's open up the toolkit. These are real, research-backed strategies that PYP teachers are using every day to make assessment a part of the lesson that's accessible and even empowering for kids. First tool in the kit, it's all about making things clear. The old way, it could feel like the teacher held all the secrets to getting a good grade. The new way is to make the learning goals, what we call learning intentions, totally transparent. And then, this is the cool part, to build the success criteria with the students. They actually become co-creators of their own roadmap to success.
And here is just a brilliant example of how simple and powerful this can be. There's a Year 1 teacher, Linda, who uses 2 pop-its. WALT is for we are learning to, that's the big goal for the lesson, and WILF is for what I'm looking for. Those are the success criteria. It's amazing. It takes these abstract ideas and makes them totally tangible and easy to remember, even for 6-year-olds.
Okay, the next strategy is all about the power of talk. But we're not talking about just any old chatter. This is dialogic talk, and it's where students are actively taught how to listen to each other, how to ask good questions, and how to build on what someone else has said to get to a much deeper shared understanding.
And who better to explain how powerful this is than a student himself? Listen to Sam, a first grader. He gets it. He sees that when his friends have different ideas, it's not about him being wrong. It's a chance to make his own work even better than before. I mean, that's collaborative learning in a nutshell, right there.
Of course, no toolkit for assessment would be complete without talking about feedback. But for feedback to really work, for it to be accessible, it has to be way more than just a red pen marking what's wrong. It needs to be a conversation that actually moves learning forward.
And here's that same teacher, Linda, again with just a killer insight.
Instead of just pointing out a mistake and telling a student how to fix it, she asks questions. That simple little shift makes the student do the heavy lifting. It forces them to think, to look back at the success criteria, and to really connect the dots in their own brain.
And that leads us perfectly into our final tools. And these are all about putting the power of assessment right where it belongs, in the hands of the students themselves. This is where they really start to become the owners of their own learning.
So why is peer assessment so powerful? Well, as Linda points out, students just speak a different language with each other. They're often way more open to hearing some constructive feedback from a friend, and what's amazing is they learn just as much from giving the feedback as they do from getting it.
But, and this is a big but, making this accessible doesn't just happen by magic. You can't just tell a class, okay, go give each other feedback. It needs structure. So a great teacher like Linda will actually model how to do it. She'll provide helpful sentence starters, she'll constantly remind them of the learning goals, and, this is key, she'll give them the time to actually use that feedback to make their work better.
So, when we start to pull all of these different tools together, we see a picture that's so much bigger than just a few clever classroom tricks. What we really see is assessment becoming a core part of the learning itself.
This framework just lays it all out so beautifully. Look how each strategy connects to the next. The clear learning intentions. They lead to the co-created success criteria. Those criteria then become the foundation for great questioning, for targeted feedback, and for meaningful self-assessment. It's a continuous, self-reinforcing cycle where teaching, learning, and assessing are all woven together. So, what are the big takeaways here? Well, it's that great assessment isn't some big, scary event that happens at the end of a unit. It's a constant, dynamic process. It's all about empowering students by making their own learning visible to them, and it's something that's just woven into the very fabric of everything you do in the classroom.
And that, of course, brings it all back to you. Look, the goal isn't to go out and try to do all of this at once. That would be overwhelming. It's about taking one small, deliberate step. So looking at this whole toolkit, just ask yourself, which one of these strategies could I try to weave into my lesson tomorrow, just to make learning a little more visible, a little more collaborative, and a little more accessible for every single student in my room?